The words were barely louder than a breath, yet they silenced the royal ballroom on the 31st floor of the Ferraro Grand Hotel. 500 vampires stood beneath black crystal chandeliers, their faces pale and motionless, their attention fixed on the 11-year-old boy holding the first chalice. Matteo Ferraro stood on a raised platform of polished black marble, both hands wrapped around the silver cup. Dark red liquid trembled near its rim. Golden symbols moved faintly across the metal like sleeping fire. Behind him stood his father, King Lorenzo Ferraro, dressed in black from collar to cuff. The candlelight made Lorenzo's already white face appear even paler, almost carved from winter stone. For the first time that evening, his expression shifted only slightly, a pause in his breathing, a tightening at the corner of his mouth. Then the mask returned. "Repeat the vow," Lorenzo said. His voice was quiet, but it reached every wall. Matteo swallowed. Around the platform, ancient nobles lowered their heads. Along the rear of the ballroom, every human server looked down at the floor except Alice Cooper. She stood beneath a gold-lit archway beside a service table, a silver tray balanced against her hip. From nearly 60 feet away, Matteo found her immediately. 12 hours earlier, he had been only a lonely boy sitting in an empty dining room with a cup of hot chocolate cooling between his hands. He had asked Alice one question. She had answered honestly. Now that answer stood between him and a tradition 900 years old. "A king belongs to the bloodline," Matteo began. His voice shook. The words echoed through the ballroom. "Before he belongs to himself," Lorenzo prompted. Lady Valentina Moretti stood at the king's right hand, her white hair pinned beneath a crimson jeweled crown. "Drink, your highness," she said. Matteo raised the chalice. A bell sounded from somewhere beneath the hotel. Once, deep, final. The marble floor hummed under Alice's shoes. Fine lines of gold awakened around Matteo's fingers. Alice held his gaze. She gave no signal. She did not nod. She did not tell him to obey or resist. She only looked at him the way she had in the dining room, as though he were a child allowed to speak the truth. Matteo stared into the cup. Then his hands stopped trembling. "No." A whisper moved through the ballroom. Lorenzo's crimson eyes narrowed. "Matteo, this tradition does not protect me." Valentina's faint smile disappeared. Matteo lowered the cup. "Someone asked me what I was afraid of." Valentina followed the direction of his eyes. Her gaze crossed the nobles, the guards, and the servants until it settled on Alice beneath the archway. The temperature dropped. Lorenzo looked toward her as well. His attention landed with the weight of a locked door. "Finish the vow," he told his son. Matteo looked at his father. For 1 second, the boy seemed smaller than the ceremonial coat on his shoulders. Then he opened his hands. The first chalice fell. It struck the marble with a clean metallic crack and split into 3 pieces. The liquid spilled across the floor, but it did not spread. It raced through hidden grooves in the stone, drawing a vast circle around the throne. Golden symbols flared beneath it. Every chandelier went dark. The music stopped. The ballroom vanished into shadow. A thin red glow rose from the floor, revealing Matteo at the center of a pattern shaped like a cage. Someone whispered, "The binding." Another voice answered, "He broke the royal tradition." Matteo gasped and stepped back. Alice lowered her tray and moved toward him before fear could stop her. Guards crossed her path, silent and swift, but Lorenzo raised one hand. They froze in place. Valentina turned toward Alice, her face sharpened by something colder than anger. That human interfered with the air. Alice stopped at the edge of the glowing circle. Lorenzo descended 1 step from the platform. "What did you say to my son?" he asked. Alice opened her mouth, but Valentina pointed at her first. She poisoned his judgment. The symbols beneath Matteo burned brighter. Lorenzo looked from the broken chalice to his son, then back to Alice, the only human in the room still standing upright beneath his gaze. "Seal every door," he commanded. Heavy locks thundered through the Ferraro Grand Hotel. No one moved, no one spoke. And Alice understood that one private conversation had just shaken an immortal kingdom. 12 hours earlier, Alice Cooper had been balancing 3 breakfast plates when her manager told her she would be serving at the royal reception upstairs. She nearly lost her grip on the coffee. "I am already scheduled through lunch," she said. Marcus Bell did not look up from his clipboard. "Tonight is mandatory. The invited families arrive at 6, and every available employee stays until midnight." Alice glanced at the brass clock above the kitchen doors. It was 7:45 in the morning. Her feet already hurt, and she had slept less than 5 hours in the small Queen's apartment she shared with 2 roommates. Still, she nodded. Another collection notice for her late mother's hospital bills had arrived 3 days earlier. A double shift meant overtime. Overtime meant 1 less envelope waiting on the counter like a quiet threat. By noon, the Ferraro Grand Hotel no longer felt like a hotel. Black cars lined the Manhattan curb. Security officers appeared beside every elevator. Florists carried in midnight roses so dark they looked blue beneath the lobby lights. Guests crossed the marble floor without checking in, and every employee lowered their voice when those guests passed. They were too graceful, too silent, too pale. At 3 o'clock, Marcus gathered the service staff near the kitchen. "You will not use the north elevators. You will not enter the 31st floor unless a direct royal service order calls you there. You will not speak to anyone unless they speak first." His eyes moved across the group and stopped on Alice. "And no one goes near the east dining room." Alice frowned. "Why?" Marcus looked at her as if she had questioned gravity. "Because people who ask questions do not last here." At 4:20, a room service ticket appeared beside the tea station. "Chamomile tea, 1 pot, no sugar, east dining room." Alice read it twice. The kitchen captain pushed the tray toward her. "Direct royal order? Take it upstairs." The 31st floor was colder than the rest of the hotel. Not air-conditioned cold, winter church cold. A long hallway stretched beneath amber wall lamps, each reflected in the black floor like a distant moon. There was no music, no conversation, only a bell ringing somewhere beyond the walls at measured intervals. Alice found the east dining room with its door partly open. "Room service," she called. No answer. She stepped inside. A boy sat alone at the far end of a table built for 20 people. He looked about 11 years old. Dark hair, white skin, a formal black coat buttoned to his throat. A blank menu rested before him, untouched. Alice set down the tray. "Chamomile tea?" The boy looked at the pot, then at her. "I did not order it." "I was afraid you might say that." She reached for the handles. "I can take it back." "No." The answer came too quickly. Alice paused. "All right." She poured 1 cup. His hands rested flat on the table, but his fingers tightened when the distant bell rang again. Once, deep, heavy. He stared at the tea without drinking it. "Are you waiting for someone?" Alice asked. "I am waiting to be called." "For dinner?" His grey eyes lifted to hers. They were far too serious for a child. "For practice." Alice should have left. Marcus had made that clear. Then she noticed the untouched place setting and the 19 empty chairs surrounding him. "Have you eaten?" "I am not hungry." His stomach quietly disagreed. Alice pretended not to hear, found cocoa and mixed it with hot milk from the service urn. "This is not on the menu," she said, as she placed the cup in front of him. "So officially, it does not exist." The boy watched the steam curl upward. Because nobody should have to sit at a table this large alone. Something changed in his face, not quite a smile, the memory of one. He wrapped both hands around the warm cup. "What is your name?" "Alice Cooper. I am Matteo." She did not recognize the name. Not yet. Another bell rang, and Matteo flinched before forcing his shoulders still. Alice heard the breath catch in his chest. "What happens at practice?" she asked. "I learn how not to be afraid." Alice pulled out the chair across from him and sat for only a moment. That sounds like something adults say when they do not want a child to admit he is scared. Matteo stared at her. For the first time he looked less like a portrait and more like a lonely boy. Outside the room, measured footsteps stopped. The air tightened. Alice turned toward the door. A tall man stood there, dressed in black from collar to cuff. His face was white, colder and paler than any human face she had ever seen. His eyes moved from the untouched tea to the cup of hot chocolate, then settled on Alice. Matteo lowered his gaze. "Father," he said. The man in the doorway did not enter immediately. He stood beneath the amber light, and the room seemed to tighten around him. The distant bell stopped. The air turned colder. Alice rose so quickly that the chair whispered across the black floor. Matteo kept both hands around the hot chocolate, but his shoulders stiffened beneath his formal coat. "I was delivering tea," Alice said. The man's gaze moved to the untouched chamomile, then to the cocoa, then back to her. "You were sitting with my son." His voice was quiet, controlled, and absolute. Alice glanced at Matteo. He was alone. The man stepped into the room. He was about 6 feet 3 inches tall, with dark hair, sharp features, and skin so white that it looked untouched by ordinary daylight. His expression revealed little, but his eyes carried an old, careful suspicion. "That was not an invitation," he said. "No, sir." Matteo looked up. She did not know who I ward him. A flicker of surprise crossed his pale face before disappearing. "That is difficult to believe." "It is true," Matteo answered. The words were soft, but they came without hesitation. Footsteps hurried through the hallway. Marcus Bell appeared at the door, breathing too quickly. The moment he saw the man in black, he bowed. "Your Majesty." Alice felt the meaning of those 2 words settle over her. King Lorenzo Ferraro. His family name was engraved on the hotel entrance, printed on every employee badge, and whispered whenever the private elevators opened. She had believed the Ferraros were only wealthy. standing 10 feet from Lorenzo. She understood that money was the smallest part of his power. "I apologize," Marcus continued. "Miss Cooper was not authorized to remain with the prince." Lorenzo did not look away from Alice. "Leave us." Marcus backed into the hallway and closed the door. The silence he left behind felt heavier than before. "What did you say to Matteo?" Lorenzo asked. Alice folded her hands over her apron. "I asked whether he had eaten." "What else?" "Nothing that required an investigation." Lorenzo's eyes moved to the cup. "My son does not accept food from strangers." Matteo lifted the hot chocolate and took another sip. Lorenzo became perfectly still. It lasted less than a second, but Alice saw it, not anger, surprise. "He was hungry," she said. "He said he was not." Children say many things when they think the truth will disappoint an adult. Matteo lowered his eyes. Lorenzo studied him as though trying to hear a voice hidden behind years of obedience. "You may return to your duties," he told Alice. She took one step toward the door, then stopped. "May I say something?" "You appear determined to." Alice looked toward Matteo. "He flinches whenever the bell rings." Matteo's fingers tightened around the cup. Lorenzo's gaze cooled. "The bell marks his training." "It sounds as though it marks his fear." The temperature dropped another degree. Alice heard her own heartbeat, fast but steady. Lorenzo moved closer, not threatening yet impossible to ignore. "You have known my son for less than 10 minutes. That was long enough to notice 19 empty chairs around him. Lorenzo looked down the long table. The untouched place setting stretched beneath the lights like evidence no one had intended to present. "An heir must learn solitude," he said. "A child learns loneliness first." His eyes. "Do you believe he should learn? That someone will listen when he speaks?" Matteo drew a small breath. Lorenzo heard it. His gaze shifted to his son, and the distance between them suddenly appeared greater than the length of the table. "Matteo," he said, "what did you tell her?" The boy watched steam rise from his cup. "More than I told you." Lorenzo's right hand closed slowly at his side. The movement held no rage. It looked more like the first crack in a certainty he had carried for years. "Return to your duties, Miss Cooper." Alice reached the doorway. "And Alice," Lorenzo added. She turned. "Do not speak to my son again without permission." She met his gaze calmly. "Then perhaps ask him whether being heard should require permission." She left before courage became recklessness. Behind her, Lorenzo remained beside the long table, staring at the cup his son had chosen to keep. Minutes later, he entered his private study and called the head of security. "Run a preliminary search on Alice Cooper. Begin with internal records." The first report arrived 17 minutes later. The hotel system had matched Alice's emergency contact history to a sealed royal personnel file. Lorenzo opened it. A name appeared beneath a faded service emblem. Eleanor Cooper, former nurse, restricted Royal Medical Service. He stared at the employment date. It was the same year Queen Isabella had died. Lorenzo read the line again, slower this time. Then he reached for the secure phone. "Open the sealed medical archive," he said. Now by 5:30 that evening, the Ferraro Grand Hotel had become a maze of locked elevators, whispered instructions, and employees pretending not to notice how cold the 31st floor had become. Alice returned to the staff station because her access badge had stopped working after royal security restricted the floor. Without a replacement, she could not enter the service kitchen, clock out, or prove she belonged anywhere near the reception. She found the station empty. Beyond the narrow service door, Matteo's voice repeated the same sentence for the third time. "A king belongs to the bloodline before he belongs to himself." Alice reached for the new badge waiting beneath her name. She should have taken it and left. Lorenzo had given her a direct order. "Do not speak to my son again without permission." Then another voice answered from inside the rehearsal chamber. "Again, Your Highness." Alice recognized Lady Valentina Moretti from the framed photographs in the employee briefing room. Chairwoman of the Royal Council, Royal Advisor. Her voice was smooth, but there was no warmth in it. Matteo repeated the vow. The distant bell rang, and his words broke before the final line. Valentina released a measured breath. "Fear is beneath the air." "I am not afraid," Matteo said. "Then prove it when the families assemble." Footsteps approached the service door. Alice moved back as Valentina emerged with two attendants dressed in dark formal coats. The older woman's white hair was held beneath a crimson jeweled comb. Her eyes moved from Alice's uniform to the replacement badge in her hand. "You are the waitress." Alice kept her voice respectful. "Yes, ma'am, the king has forbidden you from speaking with the prince. I am only collecting my access card." Valentina studied her for a moment. "Remember that kindness does not grant you a place in royal affairs." She turned to one of the attendants. The prince has 5 minutes before the final rehearsal. No one enters. Both attendants followed her toward the ballroom, leaving Matteo alone behind the closed door. Alice waited until the elevator doors shut. Then she picked up her badge. "She is gone," Matteo said from inside. Alice closed her eyes. "I am not supposed to speak to you, then do not speak. Just listen." The door opened a few inches. Matteo stood inside, still wearing the black ceremonial coat. Behind him, a silver replica of the first chalice rested on a stone table. Its engraved symbols were decorative, but even the copy looked too heavy for a child's hands. "My mother refused the ceremony," Matteo said. "That is what they told me after she died. They said she became weak. They said she forgot what she owed the crown. Alice should have walked away." Then she saw his fingers tighten when the bell sounded again, and she remembered the empty chairs around him. "What do you believe?" she asked. "I do not know what I am allowed to believe." The answer stopped her. Alice remained outside the chamber. She did not cross the doorway. "What happens if you refuse?" "The council will call me unfit. My father will be dishonored. The old families may challenge him. Everyone will know I was afraid." "What happens if you agree?" Matteo looked toward the practice chalice. "I promise that the crown owns me before I own myself." Alice felt the sentence settle between them like a locked gate. "Does the tradition protect anyone?" "It protects the throne," he answered automatically. "Does it protect you?" Matteo said nothing. The bell rang again. His shoulders tightened, but he kept his eyes on Alice. "No," he whispered. "Then being afraid is not the only thing that matters. What else matters? Who the rule helps and who it hurts." Matteo turned toward the silver cup. "What if that means the rule is wrong?" Alice chose her words carefully. "Do not refuse because you are frightened. Tell the truth about what frightens you. Then decide whether saying yes would be honest." His grey eyes lifted, disloyal. "A promise made through fear is not loyalty," Alice said softly. "It is a cage." The room became very still. Matteo studied his reflection in the silver cup. "My father says a king must never hesitate. Maybe a good king hesitates before making a promise he cannot undo." Footsteps sounded at the far end of the hall. Alice stepped away from the door. Matteo caught it before it closed. "If I tell the truth tonight, will you be there?" She thought of Lorenzo's order and understood that this conversation would have consequences if anyone discovered it. Still, she remembered the lonely boy at the table. "I will be serving in the ballroom." Matteo nodded once, not relieved, resolved. Alice took her badge and left as the attendants returned. Inside the chamber, Matteo faced the replica again. The bell rang. He lifted the silver cup with steady hands. "A king belongs to the bloodline," he said. Then he stopped before the final line. The symbols beneath Matteo's feet brightened until the ballroom glowed red and gold. Alice stood at the edge of the circle, unable to look away. The pattern was not a crown. It was not a family crest. It curved inward around the boy like a cage. Matteo pressed one hand to his chest. "Father," he whispered. Lorenzo stepped down from the platform, but the moment his shoe touched the outer line, the symbols surged. He stopped. A deep vibration moved through the marble and trembled through every glass in the room. Lady Valentina Moretti stared at the broken chalice. "The vow was interrupted after the blood awakened," she said. "The binding is searching for completion." Lorenzo turned toward her. "End it." For the first time, uncertainty crossed Valentina's face. "Only the heir can complete the vow." Matteo shook his head. The glowing lines tightened around his shoes without touching him. "I will not say it." Murmurs spread through the ancient families. "The prince has been influenced," one council member said. The human spoke with him before the ceremony, another answered. Hundreds of eyes turned toward Alice. She barely noticed. Matteo's breathing had become shallow and his right hand trembled. "Matteo," she called. His grey eyes found hers through the red light. "Look at me." Valentina moved between them. "You will remain silent." Alice stepped closer. "He is struggling to breathe. He is a vampire heir," Valentina replied. "You understand nothing about royal blood magic." Lorenzo's voice cut through the room. "Let her speak." Valentina turned. "Your Majesty, she caused this. That has not been proven." Lorenzo kept his gaze on Matteo. "Alice, what do you see?" She swallowed. "A child trying not to show that he is afraid." Matteo closed his eyes. The pattern flared. Alice remembered sitting beside her mother during Eleanor's final months. Whenever fear stole Alice's breath, Eleanor had pressed 2 fingers against the inside of her wrist. 3 steady beats, a pause, 3 more. A simple rhythm, Eleanor said she had learned from a patient many years ago. Alice approached the circle. 2 royal guards blocked her path. Lorenzo raised one hand, and they moved aside. "If the pattern reacts, stop me," Alice said. "It reacted to me," Lorenzo answered. His face was pale and rigid. The binding recognizes my blood as part of the seal. It does not recognize yours. Alice crossed the outer line. The light curled around her shoes but did not rise. A shocked silence fell over the ballroom. Valentina's composure cracked. Lorenzo did not move. Alice entered the circle and reached Matteo. Up close, he looked younger than he had in the rehearsal chamber. Not a prince, not an heir, just an 11-year-old boy trapped inside a promise he had never chosen. "Give me your hand," she said. Matteo placed his cold fingers in hers. Alice pressed 2 fingertips against the inside of his wrist. 3 beats, pause, 3 more. Matteo's breathing slowed. The red lines flickered. Alice repeated the rhythm. The outer circle dimmed, then went dark, for 3 brief seconds. Lorenzo crossed it at once and reached his son. This returned as a faint glow beneath the marble, unstable but not gone. Matteo leaned against his father, breathing evenly again. For one quiet moment, Lorenzo held him without rank or ceremony between them. Then he looked at Alice. "Something my mother taught me." Valentina stared at Alice's hand. "No human method can interrupt royal blood magic. Then perhaps someone designed a way to stop it," Alice said. Valentina's expression hardened. "Or she carries forbidden knowledge she has concealed from this court." "I do not," Alice answered. "You crossed a binding no vampire could enter," Valentina said. "You silenced symbols older than this city. You persuaded the heir to reject his oath. How many coincidences must we accept?" Lorenzo moved Matteo behind him and faced the council. "Enough." His voice shook the candle flames. "No judgment will be passed in this ballroom." Valentina lowered her head, but not in surrender. "Ancient law requires that she be judged before dawn. If the court finds that she corrupted the succession, the sentence is death." Matteo gripped his father's sleeve. "She saved me." Lorenzo placed one hand over his son's. His crimson gaze remained fixed on Valentina. "Then before dawn," he said, "this court will learn whether it still knows the difference between truth and fear." The hearing began at 1:15 in the morning beneath the Ferraro Grand Hotel. Inside a chamber no human guest would ever know existed. Alice stood within a silver circle set into the black floor. The circle was designed to reveal active magic, not restrain the person inside it, yet the cold metal beneath her shoes made the room feel smaller. 12 council members occupied the curved benches above her, their pale faces still beneath blue flames. Lorenzo sat at the center beneath the royal crest. Before the hearing began, he had placed every sealed medical archive under royal lock. No document could be removed, altered, or destroyed without his not present. Lady Valentina Moretti rose from the council's right side. "Alice Cooper," she said, "you are accused of interfering with the royal succession, influencing the heir against a lawful oath and using forbidden knowledge to disrupt a blood binding." Alice kept her hands at her sides. "I did not use magic, yet the binding weakened beneath your touch. I helped a frightened child breathe." A murmur passed across the benches. "You spoke with Prince Matteo after King Lorenzo explicitly forbade further contact." Lorenzo's crimson gaze settled on Alice. The consequence she had expected had arrived. "Is that true?" he asked. Alice could have softened the answer. She did not. "Yes." The chamber became perfectly still. "Why?" Lorenzo asked. "Because he asked me to listen. That did not place you above a royal command." "No, Your Majesty." Alice held his gaze. "It means I chose the child standing in front of me over the rule standing behind him." One elder leaned forward. "She admits defiance." "I admit what I did," Alice replied. "That is not the same as admitting the motive you assigned to me." Valentina's eyes narrowed. "Then repeat exactly what you told the prince." Alice described the rehearsal chamber, the silver practice chalice, Matteo's fear, and the questions she had asked about whom the tradition protected and whom it harmed. She did not change a word. When she finished, Valentina turned toward Lorenzo. "She taught him to challenge the throne. I asked him to tell the truth before making a promise." Alice said. "A servant does not instruct an heir in truth," another elder replied. Alice looked toward the council. "Then who does?" Silence answered her. Valentina lifted one hand. "Under succession law, testimony from an heir suspected of mental influence cannot be admitted without royal examination." A door opened behind the council. Matteo entered wearing a plain black shirt instead of his ceremonial coat. 2 royal guards followed several feet behind him. "I invoke the heir's right to answer any charge made in my name," he said. Every face turned. Lorenzo rose halfway from his seat. "Matteo, I ordered you to remain in your rooms. Lady Valentina says I am old enough to surrender my will to the crown, but too influenced to explain why I refused." Matteo walked toward the center of the chamber and stopped beside Alice's silver circle. "Which one is true?" Valentina's voice sharpened. Your Highness, this proceeding concerns the human's conduct. Her conduct was listening to me. You may have been manipulated. Matteo faced the 12 council members. You call me the future king, but you will not let me speak. Do you want a king, or only a mouth that repeats your words? The blue flames bent toward him. Lorenzo stared at his son with an expression Alice had not seen before, not pride, recognition. The heir must first be examined, Valentina said. Then examine me, Matteo answered. Ask what Alice told me to do. No one moved. Lorenzo descended from the central seat. I will ask. He stopped before his son. Did Alice Cooper tell you to refuse the first chalice? No. Did she tell you to disobey me? No. Did she promise to protect you if you rejected the vow? Matteo shook his head. She asked whether saying yes would be honest. Lorenzo looked toward Alice. The anger in his pale face had not disappeared, but it had changed direction. Valentina spoke quickly. His denial does not explain how she crossed the binding. Then investigate the method, Lorenzo said. Do not invent the motive. Ancient law requires confinement until judgment. Agreed. Alice's stomach tightened. Lorenzo turned toward the guards. Alice Cooper will remain under royal protection, not council custody. No one questions her without my presence. Valentina's composure slipped. If she is dangerous, you accept responsibility for every consequence. Lorenzo stepped between Alice and the council. I do. Matteo reached toward the silver circle, then stopped before crossing its edge. Alice gave him a small nod. Valentina returned to her seat. This hearing is suspended until the sealed records are examined. Lorenzo faced Alice. Your mother's name appears in a royal medical file connected to Queen Isabella. Alice forgot the cold chamber. My mother beside her. Matteo went completely still. Eleanor Cooper knew my mother. Lorenzo looked from his son to Alice. That, he said, is what someone tried very hard to hide. 3 hours before sunrise, and Matteo into the sealed medical archive beneath the Ferraro Grand Hotel. The room was narrow and windowless, lined with steel cabinets older than the building above them. Blue lamps burned without heat along the ceiling. Every drawer carried the Ferraro crest and a date written in silver ink. 2 royal guards remained outside the locked door. No council member had been permitted to enter. Lorenzo placed his palm against a black panel. The metal recognized him, and a cabinet marked with the year of Queen Isabella's death opened with a low click. A silver index inside the door listed 7 files. Only 6 remained. Lorenzo studied the empty space between them. 1 record was removed before I placed the archive under royal lock. Alice saw her mother's name on the nearest folder. Eleanor Cooper. The letters looked impossible in that cold room. Eleanor had spent most of Alice's childhood working night shifts at small clinics in Queens. She had packed school lunches, saved grocery coupons, and apologized whenever money ran short. She had never spoken of kings. Alice opened the folder carefully. The first page identified Eleanor as a human nurse assigned to restricted royal medical service. The second named her patient, Queen Isabella Ferraro. Matteo moved closer. She cared for my mother. Lorenzo's pale face remained still, but his hand tightened against the cabinet. For 11 months, Alice turned another page. Most of the medical language was ordinary. Interrupted sleep, weakness, irregular heartbeat. Then Eleanor's handwriting appeared in the margin. The patient's distress increases after ceremonial preparation. Golden markings appear beneath the wrist. Relief occurs when pressure is applied in 3 measured beats, followed by a pause. Alice stared at the note. That rhythm. Lorenzo looked at her. The one you used on Matteo, she nodded. My mother used it whenever fear made it difficult for me to breathe. She said a patient taught her. Matteo touched the inside of his wrist. My mother taught her. Lorenzo removed a second file. Inside was a drawing of the first chalice surrounded by ancient symbols. These markings opened outward, forming a shield around a single figure. They did not curve inward like the cage that had trapped Matteo. Beneath the drawing was an inscription written in the oldest Ferraro dialect, a language Lorenzo had learned centuries before Manhattan had its name. He read it slowly. Let no command enter where the heir's will has not opened the door. Matteo looked from the page to his father. The ceremony was supposed to protect me. Yes, Lorenzo said. Alice placed the drawing beside a copied sketch of the symbols that had appeared in the ballroom. 3 marks faced the opposite direction. These were changed. Lorenzo compared them, darkened, deliberately. Matteo's voice became smaller. Then the circle was never supposed to trap me. Lorenzo did not answer immediately. No. Alice continued through Eleanor's notes. 1 entry had been underlined twice. Queen Isabella believes the current ceremony no longer protects the heir. She believes consent has been altered into surrender. Evidence must not remain inside the royal residence. The next 3 pages had been removed cleanly. Alice looked toward the empty place in the cabinet. The missing file contained the rest, or someone believed it did, Lorenzo replied. A faded symbol had been stamped at the bottom of Eleanor's final note. Alice recognized it. She reached into her pocket and removed the narrow brass key she had carried since sorting through her mother's belongings 2 years earlier. It bore only a number and a worn medical seal. I never knew what this opened. Lorenzo entered the number into the archive terminal. A record appeared. St. Catherine's Medical Center, private storage box. Eleanor Cooper. Your mother moved something outside royal control, he said. Matteo looked at the torn pages. The proof? Possibly, Lorenzo answered. He did not promise what the box contained. Alice closed her fingers around the key. A memory returned. Eleanor sitting beside a dark apartment window, pressing 3 steady beats against Alice's wrist and whispering that a promise should protect the person who made it. At the time, Alice had believed her mother was speaking about fear. Now she understood Eleanor had been preserving something larger than comfort. Lorenzo reached for the secure phone, but it rang before he touched it. The head of royal security spoke from the other end. Your Majesty, St. Catherine's received an emergency request to open Eleanor Cooper's storage box 6 minutes ago. Lorenzo's gaze sharpened. Was it opened? No, the hospital requires the physical key. The request is still pending. Alice tightened her grip around the brass key. Who submitted it? Lorenzo asked. The answer crossed the silent archive. Lady Valentina Moretti. The royal convoy reached St. Catherine's Medical Center 20 minutes before 4 in the morning. Cold rain silvered the empty Manhattan streets and tapped against the black cars as they stopped beneath the hospital awning. Lorenzo had remained at the Ferraro Grand Hotel because the council had opened an obstruction hearing against him. If he left while evidence was under review, Valentina could demand that his authority over the investigation be suspended. So he sent Alice with Captain Dario Vale and 6 royal guards. Matteo had been ordered to remain in his rooms. He had used the heir's unrestricted access seal, entered the reserve car before Captain Vale received the final passenger list, and stayed silent until the convoy was 3 blocks from the hotel. Now Alice stared at him beneath the hospital lights. Your father told you to stay. I know, he is going to be furious. I know that too. Captain Vale touched the communication device at his ear. We cannot return him now. The council has, and a second route would expose the convoy. Alice looked at Matteo. You stay beside me. He nodded. The hospital administrator met them in the lobby wearing navy scrubs beneath a grey cardigan. She checked Alice's identification, compared her date of birth with Eleanor Cooper's family record, and placed a signature form on the counter. Lady Moretti's request was marked urgent, she said. But the box requires both the registered key and a verified family signature, Alice signed. The administrator led them through 2 locked corridors into an old storage wing beneath the emergency department. Metal boxes lined the walls. At the far end stood a narrow compartment bearing the number engraved on Alice's brass key. She inserted it. The lock turned. Inside rested a wooden case, a sealed envelope, 3 folded medical pages, and a silver disc carrying Queen Isabella's private crest. Matteo drew a careful breath. That is my mother's seal. Alice opened Eleanor's letter. It explained that Isabella had discovered the first chalice had been altered. The original ceremony protected the heir's will, but the reversed symbols allowed members of the council to influence a future king after the vow was completed. Isabella had hidden her private seal because it was necessary to authenticate the original design. Eleanor had copied the medical records and preserved a final statement outside royal control. Alice opened the wooden case. A small recorder lay inside. She pressed the button. Static filled the room. Then a woman's quiet voice crossed 11 years of silence. My name is Isabella Ferraro. I give this statement freely and place it beneath my private seal. The first chalice was changed. The ceremony they call tradition no longer protects the heir. It binds him. If my son is ever asked to drink, he must be told the truth. Matteo stared at the recorder. Mother, he whispered. Alice removed the recording and slid it beneath her coat. Captain Vale photographed every page and transmitted encrypted copies directly to Lorenzo. He then sealed the original letter and medical records inside a royal evidence pouch. Footsteps sounded beyond the storage wing, measured. Approaching, Lady Valentina Moretti appeared with 4 council guards and a crimson-sealed order. Under emergency succession law, Prince Matteo is to be placed in temporary council protection, she announced. All evidence connected to the interrupted ceremony must remain under joint review. Captain Vale lifted his communication device. This exchange is being recorded. Alice Cooper remains under King Lorenzo's protection, and the evidence has already been registered with the Crown. Valentina's gaze moved toward the open compartment. Alice had closed her hand around Isabella's silver seal before the council entered. It rested unseen inside her coat, beside the recorder. The prince is still under suspected mental influence. He comes with us, said. Matteo looked at Alice. Fear touched his face, then steadied. I will cooperate, he said. Provided Alice leaves under royal protection and no hospital employee is detained or questioned without counsel. Valentina studied the staff members watching from the corridor. Several held phones. Captain Vale's recording device remained active. Refusing would make her lawful order appear coercive before human witnesses and royal security. Agreed, she said at last. Matteo stepped forward before anyone could reach for him. Alice caught his sleeve. I am not leaving you. You have the truth, he whispered. My father needs it more than I need another guard. Valentina ordered the sealed evidence pouch placed under joint custody, believing the decisive proof remained inside it. She did not know that Lorenzo already possessed encrypted copies. She did not know Alice carried Isabella's seal and final recording. Matteo met Alice's eyes. Tell him I chose this. Alice released his sleeve. The council guards formed around him without touching him. Captain Vale led Alice toward the service exit as Valentina took Matteo toward the opposite corridor. Before the doors closed between them, he looked back once. He was still afraid, but fear no longer decided where he stood. The convoy returned to the Ferraro Grand Hotel at 4:30 in the morning, while December rain turned the Manhattan streets black and silver. Lorenzo waited in the private arrival hall beneath the building. He stood under dim amber lights with his hands behind his back, his face pale and unreadable. The instant Alice stepped from the car without Matteo, the temperature dropped. Where is my son? Captain Dario Vale answered before Alice could speak. The council invoked emergency succession authority at St. Catherine's. Prince Matteo chose to cooperate so Miss Cooper could leave with protected evidence. Lorenzo's crimson eyes fixed on Alice. He chose to remain with Valentina. He chose to keep the hospital staff safe and make sure the truth reached you. Something shifted behind Lorenzo's expression. Pain, pride, fear. It vanished almost at once. Where did they take him? The lower ritual chamber, Vale said. The council claims he must remain isolated while the influence charge is reviewed. Lorenzo turned toward the north corridor. Alice stepped into his path. Two guards moved forward, but Lorenzo lifted one hand, stopping them. She wants you to rush down there, Alice said. She wants the court to see an angry father breaking the same laws he swore to protect. She has my child, then do not give her your authority too. Lorenzo stared at her. The silence felt sharp enough to split the room. Alice removed Queen Isabella's silver seal and the recorder from beneath her coat. Captain Vale placed a secure tablet on the evidence table. The photographs from St. Catherine's were already registered with royal timestamps. Eleanor's letter, the altered symbols, Isabella's medical notes. Static whispered through the arrival hall. Then Isabella's voice filled the space. The ceremony they call tradition no longer protects the heir. It binds him. If my son is ever asked to drink, he must be told the truth. Lorenzo did not move until the recording ended. I trusted the council's report, he said quietly. When Isabella became ill, I was in Montreal ending a rebellion. They told me the ceremonial preparation had nothing to do with her condition. Alice heard no excuse in his words. Only guilt. You did not know then, she said. You know now. The secure phone rang. Vale activated the private channel. Valentina's voice entered the hall. Your Majesty, the prince remains safe in ceremonial isolation. Transfer Alice Cooper and Queen Isabella's seal into council custody, and his isolation may end before sunrise. Lorenzo's face became perfectly still. You are placing conditions on the release of my son. I am offering a lawful resolution. The partial binding remains active. Any forced entry may cause it to close around him again. The original chalice has been prepared to complete the ceremony safely. Alice looked at Lorenzo. She still intends to make him drink. Valentina continued. The human will receive a proper judgment. The seal will be examined. The heir will complete his duty. Stability will return. Lorenzo's hand closed around the edge of the table. And if I refuse? Then the council must consider whether a compromised father remains capable of protecting the succession. The line went silent. Lorenzo turned toward the black doors leading below. If I enter by force, she invokes the binding. If I obey, Matteo loses the very will Isabella tried to protect. Alice placed Eleanor's letter beside the royal seal. Then make them answer where everyone can hear. Captain Vale looked at Lorenzo. There is one provision. Lorenzo's eyes shifted toward him. The Open Crown Review. Vale nodded. If the reigning king voluntarily suspends royal immunity, every charge involving the succession must be examined before the assembled houses. The council would be required to present the prince, the original chalice, and all registered evidence. They could not continue a private ceremony while the review remained active. It has not been invoked in 3 centuries, Lorenzo said, because the king places his own throne under judgment, Vale replied. If the houses find that you failed to protect the succession, they may remove you. Alice looked at Lorenzo. Let the truth be judged in the light, not buried behind another locked door. Lorenzo picked up Isabella's seal. Do you trust what your mother preserved? He asked. Alice looked at Eleanor's handwriting. With everything I have. Vale examined the registered files. The evidence meets the threshold to open the review. The final judgment will depend on what the original records prove. Lorenzo faced the guards. The clock above the private elevator read 4:43. Winter sunrise was still more than 2 hours away. Summon every royal house, he ordered. Open the public record. Notify the council that the lower ceremony is suspended. Vale hesitated. And your immunity? Lorenzo looked toward the corridor where Matteo was being held. I surrender it until judgment is complete. Bells began ringing throughout the hotel. Not the slow call of the first chalice, a faster, older summons that had not sounded in generations. Lorenzo stepped toward the grand chamber, no crown on his head and no guards between him and the consequence of his choice. This morning, he said, I will not stand before them as their king. His pale face hardened with quiet resolve. I will stand before them as Matteo's father. By 5:20 in the morning, every royal house still represented at the Ferraro Grand Hotel had gathered inside the grand chamber. Black banners hung between marble columns. The original chalice rested inside a glass case at the center of the floor, guarded by 2 neutral keepers appointed under the open crown review. Matteo stood between them, beyond the reach of both the council and his father. Lady Valentina Moretti remained at the council platform. Lorenzo entered without his crown. The assembled families rose, but he raised one hand. Do not honor a title that is under judgment. Silence followed him to the center of the chamber. Alice stood beside Captain Dario Vale near the evidence table, still wearing her black service uniform. Among jeweled gowns and formal coats, she looked like the only person who belonged to the world outside those walls. Lorenzo faced the gathered houses. I surrendered royal immunity so no private authority could what happens to my son. Valentinas rose slowly. You placed centuries of stability at risk because of claims carried by a human servant. Her occupation does not weaken the evidence, Lorenzo replied. Captain Vale registered Eleanor Cooper's letter, the copied medical pages and Queen Isabella's recording. He placed the silver private seal beneath a clear verification plate. Golden light passed through the crest. A single word appeared above it. Authentic. A murmur spread across the chamber. A genuine seal proves ownership, she said. It does not prove every accusation made beside it. Correct, Lorenzo answered. That is why we examine the complete record. Isabella's voice filled the chamber. She named herself. She stated that the first chalice had been altered. She warned that the ceremony no longer protected the heir's will. Matteo lowered his eyes when she spoke his name. When the recording ended, Valentina stepped forward. The late queen was seriously ill. Fear is not legal proof. Captain Vale opened the medical records recovered from St. Catherine's. These pages show that Queen Isabella's condition worsened after every ceremonial exposure. The same pages identify the compound used during preparation. A neutral royal physician compared the record with the council inventory. The formula matches, she said. Repeated exposure would have caused the decline described here. Valentina's signature appeared beneath the authorization. I approved a stabilizing treatment, she said. I did not alter the ritual. Lorenzo turned toward the original chalice, opened the base. The neutral keepers removed a narrow silver plate beneath the stem. Inside was a maintenance register spanning 9 centuries. The final entry had been made 11 years earlier. Authorized by Lady Valentina Moretti, 3 ceremonial symbols reversed under emergency preservation authority. Matteo stared at her. You changed it. I preserved the succession, Valentina answered. Your mother resisted, your father was absent. The kingdom required an heir who could not be turned against the crown. Lorenzo's pale face became colder. The evidence shows Isabella weakened each time you forced the altered ceremony upon her. Valentina looked directly at him. She fought what every queen before her accepted. Alice spoke before fear could silence her. Consent is not surrender. Valentina turned toward her. You know nothing about ruling immortals. I know a promise taken by fear is not loyalty. Matteo stepped away from the center line. Did my mother ask you to stop? Valentina said nothing. Captain Vale returned to Eleanor's letter. A note at the bottom instructed him to continue the recording beyond a long stretch of static. He pressed play again. Isabella's voice returned, weaker but clear. Lady Moretti threatened to activate the binding in Matteo if I continued resisting. Eleanor is taking the seal beyond the palace. If anything happens to me, my son must know I did not abandon him. Matteo closed his eyes. Lorenzo's hand tightened at his side. Valentina looked across the assembled houses and understood that denial would no longer protect her. I did what was necessary, she said. Matteo opened his eyes. You did what fear told you was necessary. One neutral keeper moved to suspend Valentina's authority. Before he reached her, Alice noticed the older woman's lips moving. 3 words in the ancient Ferraro dialect, words written beside the altered symbols. The original chalice answered with a low red glow. Golden markings appeared beneath Matteo's wrist. He pressed one hand to his chest. Lorenzo moved toward him. A keeper warned, your blood remains part of the seal. Touching him now may complete the binding. The glass case cracked open along its ceremonial seam. The original chalice rose beneath a column of red light. Valentina's eyes sharpened with triumph. The altered vow was prepared before this review began, she said. The ritual still recognizes its heir. Matteo's feet moved toward the chalice against his will. Alice stepped forward as the chamber filled with the sound of ancient symbols waking beneath the floor. Alice stepped toward the red light, but one of the neutral keepers raised a hand. The binding is unstable. Lorenzo did not look away from Matteo. She crossed it once before. My blood is part of the seal, hers is not. The keeper studied the symbols curling across the floor, then moved aside. You may enter, but do not touch the chalice. Alice crossed the outer line. Red light gathered around her shoes, then fell away. Matteo continued toward the original chalice, every step slow and unwilling. A hidden channel beneath the ceremonial platform opened, and the dark ritual mixture Valentina had prepared in the lower chamber rose into the silver cup. Matteo, look at me, Alice called. His head turned slightly, but his feet did not stop. Valentina repeated the ancient command under her breath. The chalice glowed brighter. Lorenzo remained beyond the seal, his pale face rigid with restraint. Alice, he said. The rhythm only interrupts the command. I know. She reached Matteo and took his hand. His skin was cold. Golden markings pulsed beneath his wrist in time with the symbols below. Alice pressed 2 fingers against him. 3 steady beats. Pause, 3 more. The lines flickered. Matteo drew a deeper breath, but the binding kept pulling him forward. Alice repeated the rhythm. This is your choice, she said. Not mine, not your father's. Yours. Matteo's foot stopped inches from the chalice. Valentina's voice sharpened. Complete the vow. His hand rose toward the silver cup. Alice pressed the rhythm again. 3 beats, pause. 3 more. Tell the truth about what you are afraid of. Matteo stared into the dark liquid. I am afraid they will call me weak. And what is the truth? His fingers trembled above the rim. I am more afraid of becoming a king who cannot say no. The symbols faltered. A murmur moved through the assembled houses. Valentina spoke the command louder. Red light climbed around Matteo's legs. Lorenzo stepped to the edge of the seal. Matteo, his son, looked back. For centuries, Ferraro kings had stood above everyone they ruled. Lorenzo lowered himself to one knee before his child. The chamber fell silent. You do not belong to the crown, Lorenzo said. His voice carried without force or command. The crown belongs to the people you choose to protect. Matteo stared at him. And if I refuse, then I will stand beside your refusal, even if you lose the throne. Lorenzo did not hesitate. Even then. Matteo turned toward the chalice. Valentina spoke again, but he reached for the cup by his own choice. The moment his fingers closed around it, the red light weakened. A king belongs first to truth, Matteo said, not to fear. He brought the chalice down against the 3 reversed symbols carved into its base. Because his consent had been withdrawn, the altered magic holding those marks together failed. Silver cracked only along the corrupted lines. The ritual mixture vanished into steam. The red light collapsed inward. Golden markings flashed across Matteo's wrist, then dimmed. Valentina stared at the broken chalice. The altered inscription still holds legal authority. Alice removed Queen Isabella's private seal from inside her coat. Captain Dario Vale held it beneath the verification plate. Golden light confirmed the original design. The seal authenticates the protected form, he said. Only the reigning king can restore it. The outer circle dimmed for 3 brief seconds. Lorenzo crossed at once. He took Isabella's seal from Alice and pressed it into the center of the original inscription beneath the throne. Ancient words appeared across the floor. Restore protection, reject possession. Lorenzo placed his palm over the seal. By the authority of the reigning Ferraro king, and with the willing refusal of the heir, I revoke every alteration made without his consent. The three reversed symbols turned outward. The cage became a shield. Warm light circled Matteo once, then faded. A neutral keeper examined his wrist. The partial binding is severed. The second keeper touched the broken chalice. It gave no response. Valentina repeated the command. Nothing answered her. She tried once more. Silence. Captain Vale stepped forward with the neutral keepers. Lady Valentina Moretti, your authority is suspended under the open crown review. You will remain in royal custody until final judgment. Valentina looked across the chamber for support. No house moved. No council member spoke. Matteo walked past the broken chalice and stopped before his father. Lorenzo rose slowly. For a moment neither spoke. Then Matteo placed his hand in his father's. The bells above the hotel stopped ringing. Beyond the winter windows, the black sky had begun to soften toward morning. The binding was gone. The air was free. And for the first time in 900 years, the crown had knelt before a child's right to choose. The final judgment began after sunrise. When the sky beyond the grand chamber windows had turned pale grey over Manhattan, Lady Valentina Moretti stood beneath neutral guard, stripped of the crimson insignia that had marked her council authority. The royal houses remained seated while Captain Dario Vale entered the complete record: Queen Isabella's authenticated testimony, Eleanor Cooper's medical notes, the altered maintenance register, Valentina's authorization, the ancient command she had spoken before the assembled court. Nothing remained hidden. One by one, the neutral keepers confirmed the findings. The first chalice had been altered without the willing consent of the heir. Queen Isabella's condition had worsened after repeated ceremonial exposure. Eleanor Cooper had moved evidence outside royal control because the palace archive could no longer be trusted. Valentina had used succession law to conceal the alteration, then attempted to complete the binding after the open crown review had begun. Even the houses that had defended the council could not deny what they had witnessed with their own eyes. Lorenzo stood before the chamber without his crown. "The evidence is complete," he said, "but judgment does not belong to me alone while my immunity remains suspended." Each royal representative entered a vote into the silver register. The chamber remained silent until the final mark appeared. The lead keeper faced Valentina. "By unanimous judgment under the original succession charter restored through the open crown review, you are removed from the royal council, stripped of all succession authority, and sentenced to permanent confinement under neutral custody. You will have no future access to the heir, the council cell, or any royal archives. You believe removing me will make them loyal." Lorenzo's pale face remained still. "No, I believe allowing them to choose will make loyalty worth having." Two council members who had signed the altered orders were removed from office and sentenced to confinement. 4 others were suspended pending separate review. The remaining members surrendered every private succession record to the neutral archive. The broken pieces of the original chalice were sealed inside a clear case, not as a sacred object, but as evidence of what tradition became when no one was permitted to question it. Lorenzo faced the royal houses. "The first chalice is abolished. No child of this crown will surrender personal proof of loyalty. Every royal minor will receive an independent guardian outside the council. Every oath of succession will require informed and voluntary consent." Matteo stood beside Alice, listening without expression. Lorenzo looked at him. "These protections begin with the heir I failed to protect." Later, after the chamber emptied, father and son remained near the winter windows. Alice waited by the evidence table, far enough away to give them privacy. "You knew I was afraid," Matteo said. Lorenzo did not deny it. "Yes. And you still told me to continue." "Yes." Matteo looked at him. "Why?" Lorenzo stared at the city below. "Because I was taught that fear was weakness. And I repeated that lesson, instead of asking whether it was true." Matteo's voice stayed quiet. "I cannot forgive you because you changed one law." Lorenzo turned toward him. "I know, you have to listen every day. Not only when the court is watching." Lorenzo nodded. "Then every day I will ask, and every day I will listen." Matteo did not embrace him. He moved one step closer and remained there. It was not forgiveness. It was the beginning of proof. Lorenzo joined Alice several minutes later. "The court approved compensation from seized council funds and the unpaid royal service owed to Eleanor Cooper," he said. "It will clear every remaining debt connected to her medical care." Alice thought of the collection notices waiting in Queens. "I will accept what my mother earned and what the court owes." "Nothing more. There is something else. She looked toward the service hallway, where hotel employees had spent the night obeying rules they were never allowed to question. Human workers in royal territory need written protections, safe hours, the right to leave a position without losing housing or protection. Lorenzo considered her words. A complete charter will require formal review. Then begin with what you can do now. Before noon, Lorenzo signed an emergency decree guaranteeing wages, safe working hours, housing protection, and freedom from forced service throughout Ferraro territory. A permanent worker protection charter would be drafted under neutral review. Eleanor Cooper was formally cleared of every accusation of disloyalty. Queen Isabella's record was restored without the word weak attached to her memory. Their names were placed together on a memorial wall inside the royal archive. Matteo set a cup of hot chocolate on the stone ledge beneath them. Alice found him there. They should have known each other longer, he said. Maybe they knew each other long enough to trust the truth, she answered. Lorenzo stopped beside them. No crown, no court. Only a father, his son, and the waitress whose kindness had reminded an ancient kingdom that protection was never meant to become possession. 6 months later, the grand chamber of the Ferraro Grand Hotel opened its doors again, but nothing inside looked as it had on the night the first chalice broke. The black ceremonial banners were gone. Morning sunlight poured through uncovered windows and stretched across the marble floor where the glowing cage had once surrounded Matteo. No silver circle waited for him. No council member stood close enough to whisper instructions. Vampires and humans sat at the same level, with no raised platform dividing those who ruled from those expected to obey. Alice Cooper stood near the front beneath the memorial names of Queen Isabella Ferraro and Eleanor Cooper. She no longer wore a server's uniform. After Lorenzo's emergency decree took effect, he had invited her to join the committee building a permanent worker protection charter. Alice had accepted only after receiving the same salary, voting rights, and freedom to resign as every other representative. For 6 months, hotel employees, human attorneys, neutral keepers, and royal delegates had debated every line. That morning, after final public review, the charter had passed. It guaranteed fair wages, safe schedules, independent housing, and the right of every human employee to leave royal service without punishment. Matteo stood at the center of the chamber in a simple dark suit. He was only 11, still smaller than the expectations once placed upon him, but his hands no longer remained rigid at his sides. Lorenzo waited several feet away without a crown. During the past 6 months, he had kept the promise he made beside the winter windows. Every evening, he asked Matteo one question and listened until his son finished answering. Some nights, Matteo spoke for an hour. Some nights, he said nothing. Lorenzo listened to the silence, too. Their trust had not returned through one apology. It returned through breakfasts at the small end of the long table, through lessons Matteo was allowed to question, and through choices Lorenzo no longer made for him. The lead neutral keeper opened the restored succession record. Matteo Ferraro, no oath is required today. You may speak, remain silent, or leave this chamber. The choice is yours. Matteo looked across the gathered houses. Several vampires who had once demanded obedience now waited without lowering their eyes or forcing his. He turned toward Lorenzo. Will you be angry if I change the words? Lorenzo's pale face softened. They are your words. Matteo faced the chamber. A king belongs first to truth, then to those who cannot protect themselves. Power does not give him ownership of another person. It gives him responsibility. If I ever forget that, I want someone brave enough to remind me. His eyes found Alice. She gave him the smallest appeared. No hidden bell rang beneath the floor. The keeper entered Matteo's statement into the royal record as a voluntary declaration, not a binding oath. The chamber began to rise, but Matteo lifted one hand. Slowly, every royal house remained standing. Nothing thundered, nothing glowed. The moment was quiet, and that was what made it new. After the ceremony, Alice stepped onto the terrace overlooking Manhattan. Early summer sunlight warmed the stone railing. Lorenzo joined her carrying 2 cups of coffee. His face remained whiter than any human face, but the cold distance that had once surrounded him was gone. The charter passed, he said. Not unanimously, Alice replied. 3 houses voted against the housing provision. You remember every objection. Someone has to. Lorenzo handed her a cup. You have changed this kingdom more effectively than many rulers. I did not change it alone. No, he said. But you were the first person in that ballroom who saw my son instead of his title. Alice looked through the open doors at Matteo, speaking with hotel employees who now addressed him without fear. He was never difficult to see. Lorenzo waited a moment before speaking again. "Would you have dinner with me tonight?" Alice looked at him. Once even his invitations had sounded like commands. Now he waited without pressure, leaving room for refusal. "Dinner," she said. "Somewhere without a royal table. There is a small restaurant in Queens." "You know restaurants in Queens?" "I have been learning." Before she could answer, Matteo appeared carrying a tray with 3 cups of hot chocolate. "I thought we needed a new tradition," he said. Lorenzo accepted 1 cup. "Is it?" Teo shook his head. "Only if everyone gets to choose." Alice took the 3rd cup. Together they returned to the bright chamber. Valentina remained under permanent neutral confinement without access to Matteo, the council, or the royal archives. Queen Isabella and Eleanor Cooper were honored together in the restored record. The first chalice was gone, its corrupted pieces preserved only as evidence. The old council had been rebuilt under public law. Matteo was free. Lorenzo was learning to become a father before a king. Alice had kept her name, her work, and her right to walk away. She stayed because staying had finally become her choice. Behind them, sunlight crossed the place where the cage had once appeared, and nothing rose to meet it.